It is 6:30, so we're opening up for our event tonight. My name is Cindy Brummer, and I am one of the founders of UX and ATX. Also with me tonight is Amanda White, and we're excited about this panel, the UX Research Path. People are going to be streaming in for a couple minutes, so while they're doing that, I'm going to go over just some announcements and housekeeping. First of all, chat. Totally open for you guys to introduce yourself to each other. I want to give you the opportunity to network. So feel free to introduce yourself, share your LinkedIn link, and also what you hope to gain from this evening, just so that you can see what everybody else is hoping to gain. Hoping to gain. We will be using the chat for questions, and we will be monitoring the chat so that we can get your questions answered. Also, if you haven't joined the Slack group, please do. That is a great place for you to connect with everyone in between our events. The link, the invite link, is on the Meetup group main page. So I know wherever you went to get to this event, go there and sign up for the Slack group. There's also a Facebook group, and I don't have the link for that tonight, but I'm pretty sure you can find it on either Slack or just by doing a search on Facebook. We have a couple of events already up on Meetup for the next couple months. We have in August a panel discussion on the challenges women face in design, particularly in UX. That's going to be really interesting. And our quarterly portfolio review will be in September. And we are working on an event for September where we're doing something with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're still pulling together what we want to do for that one, so be on the lookout for that event. And then I believe it's October, if I'm not wrong, Amanda, we're going to be doing gaming, UX gaming. And I've already got 3 panelists lined up for that, and I just haven't put that out yet. All right, it's about 6:32. I want to let you guys know that I am teaching tonight, so please welcome my class who are all here. They will be jetting sometime between 7:30 and 7:45, and then we will wrap things up by 8 o'clock tonight to let that class go on to do their presentations. They are working on a project presentation, so they have to do that right after this, and I need to go to that. So we'll be wrapping up by 8. All right, I know you guys are here not to listen to me talk, but to hear our panelists. So I want to introduce them to you tonight. First off, we have Meg Kemp with Alma Major. I'm not going to go, you can read her bio on the Meetup page. I know Meg because she was my instructor for one of my classes at the Maryland Institute College of Art, and I just think she's awesome. So I'm so glad that she was able to join us tonight. Also, Babz Jewell, she's with Verizon Connect, and I just met her tonight, and she's fantastic. I can't wait to hear what she has to say about UX research. And then Archie is with the Design Futures Initiative in GE, and I can let them expand upon their careers, but also lovely person. And you guys are going to learn a lot tonight, so I hope you came with lots and lots of questions. All right, so I'm going to put out some questions for you guys, and whoever wants to start, and then maybe each of you can respond in turn, just kind of your take on it. I think the first thing that I wanted to know is, in terms of UX research, what skills do you need to become a UX researcher? What are the kind of the things you have? Who wants to start us off with that? I'm going to call in Meg.
So what are the skills that you need as a UX researcher? I think that it's really important to, first and foremost, be humble as a UX researcher. I think that knowing that you're entering into a situation where you might think that you know the answer to your, maybe you have a problem statement, or maybe you think that you know the really cool feature that this app needs to fix everything is X, but often once you start talking to people, you realize that there is some subtlety there. So I think, yeah, staying humble, being perceptive to subtleties, having a high degree of emotional intelligence, and I think also having the patience and grit to seek out a really representative set of research participants, because that can take a long time. But it's always worth it to make sure that you are having folks that are really representative of the work that you are trying to put forward.
Totally agree with that. Archie or Babz?
All right, cool. Thanks, Mike. So skills for UX research, I've got a couple things. I would say that listening is key, and then not thinking ahead, but being able to go back to what you've already heard. So like very much thinking in the moment, and not thinking about your next question or where, like what objective you have to reach or whatever. But I practice grounded theory, which is when you come up with a theory for what you're observing based on everything you hear. So in order to be present with that, you do have to work on staying in the moment. I'm actually a fan of planning out your interview questions ahead of time and then not necessarily following them. The point of that would be to like really follow the train of thought or like a conversation as it goes. I would also say, as far as like commodifying soft skills like empathy or something, I would say that strong examples of being empathetic is very key. And so if you want to market yourself as empathetic, coming up with like key examples of where you've been empathetic and to whom and for what, and like what good that caused, basically how it allowed you to do your job better, or how it allowed the product to iterate and design better.
I mean, I'm not going to say anything different from what both of them have already mentioned. I just want to come up with talk about or touch upon like a couple of skills that I've had to really think through and get using rather. First one is critical thinking. I think Babz touched upon it. It's like thinking in the moment, but it's more than that. To be able to assess that piece of information from different directions is really important. And to be able to ask those questions in that moment is even more important, because that's when you know what that information means, what it can do for you, and how it can be impactful to all the stakeholders required. And then the other part of it is empathy is a big thing, but I see that more in the sense of, I found it as a really nice way where people are like excited to work with me. They're open to have these kind of conversations that are really, I mean, touchy sometimes. You never know. You never know what you're going to get. So it's like, I found that kind of, it's like a presence almost that you can exude to, and I know it's a really shitty way to say it, but that's part of it. That's really part of it, because you're providing, as a researcher, you're essentially providing the space for people to collaborate, and you are there as a facilitator. So they want to be able to see you as such. And empathy is something that's really keen. And the last part of it is like over communicate, no matter what. People don't understand what we do at all points of times. It like every single time I have to communicate twice over. And it's not using my words or research words, it's using business vocabulary. Just constantly communicate. Like if that's what they like to see, that's what they get. Because that's when you can do more of what you want to do as a researcher, and I get to do what I love, basically.
How do you like, so last night I was in my class and we were talking about like interviewing skills, and I was a journalist in a previous life, so I've had lots of practice interviewing, but it's something that I'm constantly working on. But I saw this deer in the headlights look in some of my classmates' faces of like, how do I interview? And I feel like that's probably a really key part. I assume that that's one of the tools you use as a researcher, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but how do you cultivate that comfortableness with doing some of these face-to-face people techniques?
I'll start this one off. So I coach interviewing a lot. That's like one of the things that people ask me personally to do, and it's something I do for my organization at Verizon. So I work with designers who work in different clans or squads about interviewing specifically. I also coach my peers, my research peers, like people who are senior UX researchers. I coach them on interviewing. So the point there is that it's something that we're always developing. It's not anything that you can ever be perfect at, such as you'll never be a perfect public speaker or like a perfect conversation partner, right? It's like, it's our basic human thing is like to talk to people. So interviewing is tricky though, because it's also a professional practice. I think of like what therapists do, or potentially, I mean, well, yeah, definitely therapy is a good example, but you're interviewing for like a lot of different objectives, right? It's like your technique can make someone feel good about themselves. Your technique can get your product team what they want and need. It can get your designers what they want and need. I think as long as you're really confident with your objective, like the point of the interview, which is why I actually recommend, like, instead of verbatim questions, I recommend a more like thematic structure for an interview of like, here are some key themes or key answers I need to get to eventually. Let's just make sure we talk about them at some point. So like a thematic arc, if you will. I also advise, my partner has a CrossFit gym, and we partner on a podcast for that, where we interview members who do things like about their professional practices and like how they've started CrossFit and how they work out and their health and wellness. And it's the exact same thing. So if you're a good interviewer and if you work on understanding, the point of the conversation and making people like feel comfortable and being goofy and like making mistakes, as an interviewer, it's key to make mistakes. But you can really apply those skills to like absolutely any context.
Yeah, I would second everything Babz that you just mentioned. And something that I like to do is, I guess it's quite similar to what you just mentioned, but like really just setting a goal instead of having like script. Having a script is really helpful just so you don't get, that deer in headlights look that you mentioned, Cindy, but just having a goal, and also remembering that it's not a sales pitch, like I think a lot of times it can feel like, all right, here I am, and we have this awesome product, and now we're going to talk about this product, and I want to make sure that you like it. That's not really the point. It's really more, it's a research study, right? But how you can make folks comfortable. There are some things that just like tactical things that I like to recommend. Definitely like touching base before your interview. So calling them on the phone, or if you have a chance to meet in person in some other time that we're not living in currently. But touch base, explain to them why you want to interview them and what the purpose is and what the end purpose of the data will be. Making sure that you have informed consent too is a really great thing to remember. And then once you do actually start talking, just like slow down, like slow everything down, like slow down your body language, don't interrupt them, don't rush, let them be heard. And I would also suggest to start with easy questions, because I think as soon as anybody feels on their heels about it, then they're not going to be giving you their full honest answer anymore, right? So like if you can start with easy, non-judgmental questions, not the questions like, oh, I see that you use the breadcrumbs in this application and not the hamburger menu, why? Because they are like, oh, now I feel stupid. Just save that type of question for later once you've built some trust.
I mean, you guys, both you ladies talked about everything that I need to talk about. I'm just going to talk about some things that I've kind of done. It's weird. I actually record me asking the same questions in my head, and I'll record my answers as well. And I just kind of see where the arc is going. Does it make sense? And when I play it back, I listen to myself talk, and it's awkward at first because I'm listening to my own voice, and it's always weird because it's weird in my head. But it like gives me an understanding, like I'm able to listen to the entire thing. I'm able to understand, okay, am I doing this right? Am I asking the right questions? is it hitting the goals, as you talked about? Is it meeting, am I going to get everything with that? Now, that being said, when it comes to the interview, the first thing I do is make them feel welcome, no matter what it is. It's like small talk. It's something random. I'll just be like, ooh, what's your favorite piece of something, you know, just like something so weird that they're just like, you know, that's an odd thing, you know. It'll be like, you're stranded on an island, what are you going to have, you know? Something that gets them just to talk, gets their mind moving, and gets their mental juices, weirdly enough, to start thinking in the same direction. And once you start doing that, you can start off with your questions, but Babz also said, you kind of have to take it with the flow. You can't follow the strict script. So I tend to not have a script that is line by line what I need to say, but more of things I need to ask about. So it'll be themes, or, you know, things I need to ask around. Like maybe it'll just be like, what do you think about this? And I guess the key thing that I want to train for, that I think I can do better, is making sure your questions are open-ended and unbiased. Those are the key factors to get like a more well-rounded answer. And kind of, it might touch upon some, not all interviews are going to be like hits. You're going to get some doozies. You're definitely going to get I would say I've sat in some really uncomfortable interviews, and it's just like, you get it. You can't help it, but it's powering through those. You'll find some key amazing things. I've also done, to kind of practice my interviews, I do projects outside of work. I found that like a great avenue to practice skills or do things new or explore new research techniques that I normally wouldn't have found. And I use places like Facebook and like random social media to be like, anyone want to participate? You get nothing but goodwill. And people are really excited. People like, it's my way to practice. Sometimes we hit things, sometimes we don't. Sometimes I get like diamonds, which is great. So you have to be open when going into an interview and welcoming to the participant.
Do you have like any like particularly memorable experiences in an interview, Archie, that you want to share?
Yeah.
Please.
Oh my God. So I was doing a project outside work it was a project on Miro. I started, firstly, there was a language barrier. We had nothing in common. She was barely in UX per se, and it was just a side project. Nothing's gonna, like, sometimes there's an outcome, sometimes there isn't. It's just one of those. I went in there starting the question, and she gave me one-word answers. We started jiving, and then I got one-word answers. I'm like, could you expand upon that? Could you tell me a little bit more? And then I'll divert to be like, oh, that's a cool window. Can you tell me a little bit more? Something to just get her talking. Maybe it's like, okay, it's her space. She's excited about her space. She might bring something. And I got zilch. So at which point I was kind of forced to stick to my script. But at the same time, it was so rigid. She kind of gave the answers I needed, but like not what I was looking for, not like that kind of conversational discussion or flow that I was expecting in. So I guess it's partly my fault as well. But it's like, it's very awkward. I try to change subjects to bring her in or ask more about her background, because people are excited to talk about their experiences and bring that in, and it wasn't working. And so we were just looking at each other at the computer, like it was through the screen. I was looking at each other, looking at her, and going like, okay, thank you very much. I'm really sorry to take up your time, because it really felt like she was just like, I don't have time for this. I don't know why I chose to do this. So I didn't want to take up any more time. Yeah.
Sorry, you're the best. Also, people, full disclosure, Archie and I know each other and we work together on nonprofit stuff. So excuse me for interrupting my friend here. But two things. Number one, that's why I pay people for every interview, is that so I can keep them on the line and I can keep asking them questions. Also, as a sociologist, I just view that it is imperative to pay people for their time, especially if you work for a company that can afford that, like my company can, and we do compensate all of our people. And platforms like user interviews, sorry, UI, user interviews is great because their whole system is set up for that. Anyways, I think it's really important to pay people so you can keep bothering them, right? So Archie, you can keep asking the question, like, and next question. My favorite example, I actually made a meme of this. I don't know where it is. I think it's on my work computer. Once I talked to this guy who had a like super thick, like Russian accent, worked in Chicago, would answer me in one word, or he'd say, next question, or I don't like this question. I was like, sir, you signed up for an interview with me. And I was like, so what do you do for work? Do you have to know this? Like things, you know, you just like wonder how you get these people on the line. So there's not, you can't always make people talk to you. You know, sometimes you'll look like their ex-girlfriend or whatever, and they just won't like you. Like there's a lot that's like outside of our control, but hopefully, yeah, so here's some really bad examples, but I appreciate what Meg and Archie had to say too. It's like, you just keep going, you know, keep going with the questions, ask the question 5 different ways. That's something I do too, is like ask something multiple times in multiple ways. And if somebody doesn't get it, don't be like, oh no, that's wrong. Just like come back to it in 30 seconds, right? And try again and see like how you can innovate and iterate around things that you need to know.
Do you, other than the Russian guy, do you have any other memorable interviews that maybe went even better than you thought they would?
I always make friends with people. I had a call recently with a guy who uses one of Verizon's products for a dog walking service in the financial district in New York. And I think I set my friend up with a job with him because she lives there and loves dogs. So like, you got to treat people like people too, right? And this guy happened to be, I'm moving to Ireland right now to be with my team. This guy happened to be Irish, was living in New York, and like we both love dogs. And I was trying to make his dreams happen. But you know, all of this, it's like our call went like 40 minutes over. Just like I just plowed through my lunch. Like sometimes like talking to people is the best part of this job, right? Like I'd argue it's one of the best parts of being a UX researcher is that, I mean, my poor boyfriend gets to hear about whoever I talk to all day. It's like, oh, I talked to this person at a dog walking business, blah. Like, I just get so stoked to talk to people about people and talk to people about themselves.
That's awesome. What about you, Meg? Do you have any memorable interviews?
Memorable interviews. Yeah, I have a handful that are similar to the experience that Archie and Babz have mentioned, where you're just kind of like, okay, I guess that this is how this is going to go, the one word answer route. And that's tough, but you can usually, I don't know, some folks are really tough, but like you were saying, Babz, like if you just keep asking the same question a couple different ways, or Archie, like the kind of the distraction model of like, okay, we're going to do a diversion over here, maybe that'll open you up. Those are always good ideas to try. I'll tell you the most memorable interview I've ever done was I was on a project that was in El Salvador, and I was asked, we were testing something for, they were using iPads for data input for different like community data collectors were going out and collecting data around agriculture practices, and the one interview that I had, I was asking about just like the use of the iPad itself, and we were there to see if the tech was like a good fit for the problem. And I guess it was a focus group more than an interview, but I had 4 or 5 different people say that they didn't feel safe having the iPad at all, and that they would much rather be just having a paper, like a notebook or something, because they felt targeted for having this iPad. And like here we were, this group of people thinking that we were like saving the world with technology, right? And it's just stuff like that you always have to stay open. Like maybe it's not the right solution. You know, maybe technology is not the solution, or just you can be surprised. So that was really memorable for me.
I was just gonna
add a quick thought though before we continue. So I had also been on the research participant side of things. I actually sign up for tons of research interviews done by other companies just so I can get a feel of what they actually do and how they do it. It's a great way to kind of see what models they're using. I do tons with like IDEO. I've had people come over to my house and sit down and chat. I sit on user testing to kind of see how things are done, what kind of questions are coming up. That's been like how I've just been testing things or seeing what works, what's happened. It's like, yeah, it's ghetto research, but it's great.
I think that's awesome. I was going to shift us just a little bit and ask if you think that the educational background matters. Like, what would be a good, like, an ideal background, or maybe there is no ideal background for moving into UX research? What are your thoughts?
I actually have 3 different backgrounds. I didn't come into UX research directly. I was an architect originally. And then I was an industrial designer for some time. I thought it was great, but not really. I was so excited about the research side of things. And then, yeah, I started doing design management, which is a little geared towards research, but more business development, business analytic, not analytics, but business development using design thinking, say. And it's not a traditional background, but I would say no matter where, like, I think the key factor is like those differences are exciting. That's what makes, like, kind of brings to the table so much more. I did not grow up here. I'm not from here. I'm an immigrant. So that adds value. I see that as a marketable opportunity because I can talk to multiple different people and they're feeling more comfortable. And I think that's how you're starting to build understanding and bring your perspective. So differences matter, and they matter in a good way, that you're actually using it as a tool within your own, like as a lens. I wouldn't even say a tool, as a lens to kind of do or conduct research. So I don't care what background you're from, as long as you have basic understanding. Honestly, as long as you have critical thinking and empathy, I'm okay. Like, you'll be a great researcher in my eyes. Everything can be like, Sir Google, you're a savior even now. So
Either of you want to jump in, Meg?
Sure. Yeah, I would second, Archie, what you're saying, that if you are empathic and you're a critical thinker, and I think that you have like a systems thinking brain, then I think that it's a great path for you. I think, like for me, I went to art school. I came into this as a graphic designer and kind of just ended up learning a little bit more about web and software and all of that. It was before there was any formal programming around UX, but I'm glad to see that there is, because I think it's great that there's like a real community of practice. But really, any like psychology, if you're interested in how humans think, neuroscience, cognitive science, sociology, anthropology, man, just so many things, architecture, even engineering, I think, like that's just, I think, I don't even want to be that limiting, but those are some of the paths that come to mind, I guess, for me, that seem like a common thread out of all of the folks that I meet that are interested in this path.
What about you, Babz?
Yeah, gosh, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So I think both Meg and Archie have gotten to the root of it, which is that, and to reiterate, it's just your skill set really is what matters. Like, same as Meg, I have an art degree, I have a history, I have an art and art history degree, I have a dance degree, a photography degree, a museum degree, a German degree. I was a Fulbright teaching fellow, like pretty professional dancer for a couple years. Like, it doesn't really matter like what you have done like in a discipline, but what matters is that you have an executable skill set now. I was just advising a really brilliant individual who is another Fulbrighter the other day, and like looking over his resume, he has all the skill sets, he can do all the methodology that I do every single day at work. And that's how I know he's going to be an excellent researcher. but he was, you know, he's studying like identity of a particular population, which is exactly what I did in grad school for sociology. I think he'd make a really good like grounded theory researcher like myself. But somebody who understands like art and design like Archie or Meg, you're going to have a certain advantage there as well. I have my academic background put me in a place to be like a great qualitative researcher. To toot my own horn, I suppose. Like I am fairly good at my job, I think. I hope I'm employed. That's nice. But I think also it's having a passion about the work. It's like one thing that's, when I got hired, my first full-time job, like with Benny's and a salary and stuff, my hiring manager was like, I have seen that you've done like an unbelievable amount of stuff on your resume. Like if I list out all my degrees, it's a long list. And she's like, what I can see from that is that you're dedicated and passionate and you like learning and you like developing your skill sets. So I would say that for me, I've been on a couple hiring panels. It's the same thing. I hired somebody with a PhD in art, right? I hired someone with a PhD in psychology. Like it really is about who you are as a person in the moment and what kind of skills and methodologies you can do day one. So like, if you have a psych degree, can you come in and run these interviews for me? Can you do some modeling or analysis of these transcripts or some data? Like, I think it's just what you can do with your background is really what matters, and not necessarily even the difference between like a PhD, not PhD. Like I have a master's and an undergrad, and I work with researchers who don't have any graduate school experience at all. It just depends on the person.
So Babz, did you have a moment when you're like, oh, this research thing that I'm on with UX, this is what I love? Any of you, the question will be for all of you, but I just wanted to start with you. Did you have that moment where you're like, this is it? This is what I want to do?
Yeah, I had that moment when I was an undergrad. I decided I wanted to get a Fulbright fellowship. So I set my degree up towards that end. I was like, I took all these classes, 4 years of a language, etc. Like just tracked myself towards a Fulbright teaching fellowship. And I thought that, I would teach afterwards. And then like somewhere at, later part of undergrad, I was like, I don't know if teaching's for me. It's like too exhausting for me. Like I like to be behind the scenes and thinking a lot, which is what I was having fun with, was doing I did my undergrad thesis in art and art history is on identity performance theory and like feminist performance theory and how you perform an identity, which track directly into sociology is like identity and networks, kind of studying. But when I just like think about things like in seeing patterns, I think they say that Jerry Garcia, when he was playing his guitar, he would literally see the music flying by and he just like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be playing right now. Like, I feel like that's what research has always been for me, is like the things are just flying by and I'm like, oh, let me just describe this rainbow to you. It sounds a bit trippy, but it's very intuitive, I guess, for me personally. Wonder what Archie and Meg, you guys think?
All right. I'm just like, tripping on the rainbow, that sounds great. Just saying. I did. I do want to preface, I was an immigrant here, so I do not have a lot of the opportunities that an American will have, which means to say that I don't have the ability to spend some time either doing Fulbright scholarship or a fellowship, or thinking about other things. It's very traditional in the pathways that you're thinking about. Now, my journey into UX was very fraught with despair and, oh my God, you're about to be deported, to, oh my God, shit, I am right now in a job that, like, at least doing what I love, just UX research. And what it was, as Babz said, talking to people and engaging with others, learning their stories. And I was talking about this well before when I was an undergrad. So my journey to it was more through education. I honestly did not realize where I was going as well. I was just kind of paving some kind of path, going like, okay, that's closer. And then my professor was like, what the fuck are you doing? This isn't your this isn't your job. This isn't what you're doing. You're not doing it right. I'm like, okay, what do I do? And he goes, why don't you try this? And I was like, it's more money. You want to give me money? No. So I got to pay for it to do something. So it was like a lot of that. And after like deep conversations with family going like, yeah, I might have to do a second master's. I might have to do this. They're like, all right, just do it. And now I always keep telling my family, I am the most educated person in this family. So I get to say what I want to say. That being said, it was after all of that, I got into my job and I was doing UX research. It took me some time to get my ground, but once I was doing it and doing all the projects on the side, I was just like, yeah, I'm here. This is it. This is that feeling of like peace. At which point it's just a matter of playing around in the industry and trying to find your way and what you're actually interested in and where you want to have that kind of research perspective, where you can bring your own perspective and lens, things like that. But it was just like, it was peaceful, if that makes sense. There was like a huge weight lifted off my shoulder going like, oh my God, what do you do? What do you do? And it's like, yeah, it's not there anymore.
That's so wonderful. This idea of like being completely at peace with where you are. I'm so happy to hear that for you. For me, I think, I guess I had a little bit of an aha moment where I was working on a software team. We were building proprietary software that was like marketing based. And I was honestly, I think it spawned out of a real frustration for like high level stakeholders not listening to people at the lower level. Like, I think it just really spawned out of a real desire to advocate for the voiceless, which in this case were just like young people at a large software company that were having to do this like drudgery type of work. And I was like, no, listen, you know, like this is what's happening. It was myself and a friend started the first UX team. It was just the two of us at this place I was at the time. But that didn't feel like, okay, I'm here, I've arrived. It really took finding like places like this, like a community around UX to feel like, oh, this is growing and this is a really important field. And I'll tell you that for me right now, even I'm trying to pursue a master's in psychology myself. I don't have a master's degree. I'm first generation college. So I think entering into the space, I didn't know what I was doing at all, I think, when I first started working. I had no idea, you know, it just, but like you were saying, Archie, it's kind of like, all right, this feels closer. Everything just starts feeling closer. And I think getting into qualitative research in UX is like, okay, what I love is really the cognitive science, the really like experimental psychology part of it, like the qualitative research part of it. And I think that UX and UX research in particular is a practical field for me to work on those skills within. And like, I like how much it's growing, because before it was always, you know, UX was the Silicon Valley thing. It was like the cool kids of California did like UX, you know, and now it's everywhere in everything. And even, you know, it's like finally kind of re-expanding into its original, I think, definition from like Don Norman and that whole group of like, it's everything. So yeah, I don't know if I can say that I landed here and was like, this is it forever, but this is, I think, the most important work that I've just working in UX, yeah.
I have completely monopolized the questioning, so I'm going to open it up. I know Amanda's been watching the chat. Amanda, what questions do we have?
So I just got one question. How much of your research is quantitative, or is it mostly qualitative?
That's a good question. I think qualitative there's two aspects to it, right? Both are necessary when it comes to business, because the quantitative side helps you sell the idea that you're wanting to, or sell the anything, while the qualitative side gives you an understanding more of like the why behind the numbers, the passion, the kind of emotion. And I guess that's a key factor in when you're coming to design. Emotions do take place in your day-to-day, so it's just understanding that as well is really important. So I wouldn't say that I'm strictly one or the other. I do practice a little bit of both. I always try to bring numbers in, especially when I'm trying to have conversations with business partners or stakeholders. And even in an interview or a survey, at the end of it, maybe one or two questions, just like to give you an example, one or two questions will give out like a sus scale or something like that, just like a scale or an understanding, just something quantitative. But it also depends on the project per se. If there's something that you can get that you need answers very directly, then sometimes something quantitative is more helpful. When something you need to understand more of the why on the discovery side, then sometimes qualitative is more helpful.
Yeah, I think like what Archie is getting at there is it's like, what's the application or purpose of this is like, so I've made some notes here. I mean, the big hot question is always like qualitative versus quantitative, but I wrote some other questions which I actually ask more often, which is this a marketing question or is this usability? Because I've said no to marketing projects before. Like somebody's like, oh, can you just like go ahead and call these like 3,000 people and figure out where they're falling out of the sales funnel? And I was like, no, how about you send that to marketing? Next question. Like, not, you know, that took a week to have that conversation, but it's also like, what do you want to know? I'm not a marketer. I'm not going to tell you why this, you know, what price this person's going to pay for this product. That's not my job. I also think the question of qualitative and quantitative has to do with the work and the output. So you can do qualitative work and have a quantitative output. Like you can put a bar chart on anything, frankly. Like when it comes to quantitative work, I partner with a quantitative researcher who he supplements my work. So I usually do a first wave of qual and say, here are my findings. What can you do going into our user database and like using these sort of thematic things of like, this is the fleet size. I work in telematics, vehicle telematics. So it's like, go into our customer database, find these people for me, figure out what their usage is of our product. So I don't think there's actually a strong line there between quantitative and qualitative at any point. It's the same body of work. I think that question, whereas it's good, I think it's not as nuanced as what somebody should be asking, frankly. Like, I can't model numbers in anything. I can't use SQL. I don't have any sort of coding skills at all, period. But I work with people who do. And that's something I'd like to move into eventually is like, you know, using R for modeling or using SQL. I use some qualitative coding softwares, but it's like, really it depends on like the team that you're working on. Yeah. So like I run surveys that are qualitative and quantitative in nature. I do interviews and then I do a rainbow sheet for an output, which is more quantitative. So to me, it's not bipolar at all.
I'm so glad that you brought up the rainbow sheet. It's a cool resource, right? I wish I had it handy, but anyway, maybe we can like shoot a link out afterwards. So I think it's a nice tool to use. So for me, the ratio, so I guess kind of selfish, to be really honest, I love qualitative research, so I always kind of am leading with that. But quantitative research, I think, is so helpful to validate, especially if you have, I think it also kind of depends what kind of research I'm going to do and what kind of research I'm going to present. I think more importantly, what kind of research I'm going to present to influence decision, I guess, depends also on who I'm presenting to. because there are definitely some stakeholders that are really linear thinkers. And I mean, it takes all kinds, it's not a judgment, but there are some folks that are really linear, and there are some folks that are really global thinkers, and they're going to be more excited about that contextual, like touchy-feely, qualitative stuff. And there are others that are like, I need the hard data, I need the sales numbers, I need who clicked on what and how many times. So I think layering it over top of one another is always a good bet. But when you are like, all right, this is it, this is my swan song, this is when I'm going to really get the budget for whatever this is that I'm trying to advocate for, just being cognizant, I think, of your audience too, is helpful when you're presenting your research. But I would say right now that my breakdown is probably like 60%, maybe, yeah, 60% qualitative and then probably 40% quant.
There was another great question in the chat that I noticed that was asking about the skills for quantitative. And I think that that's something that people struggle with. Do any of you know, like, Babz, I know you mentioned the SQL tables. Like what skills should they have for the quantitative research?
Just because you mentioned my name, like I have none. I have zero. I mean, like, I view that's a problem, maybe, not really. But it didn't matter for the role I was going for, because at my work, there are loads of people who can give them numbers, but what they didn't understand was like what was going on for users. They needed somebody to do interviews, right? So it's like, it depends on what kind of job you want, frankly, or kind of work you want to do. You'll find a fit for it. I mean, that's just been my experience. But I really resonate with what Archie and Meg have said about like the quantitative aspects, validating. But for me, to validate, if someone wants numbers on something, I'll boot that over to somebody who can handle it. It's like, our organization is very specialist driven. Like, I'm a specialist and I do qualitative all day. And then like someday, if I can get into like a data institute, or if I can get some budget to learn some quant on the side, that'd be great. But it's actually not impacted my work in the last 2 years at all. So that's just me.
Do you guys have anything to add to that?
To be honest, I'm new into this field. I've been in this field for about 2 years. It's something that I have to, and the industry that I'm in, which is the freight industry, is incredibly nascent to UX per se. I walk into a room with really old white men, to give you some context, and I have to have conversations with old white men and trying to prove my worth within that. It's harsh and it's tough, but that being said, I just kind of lean on a lot of the other researchers around to start picking up these things. And I keep forgetting the full name of this, but NN or group, or Nielsen Norman. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Yeah, Nielsen Norman. Okay, thanks, Meg. I kind of lean on their website a lot. So again, I didn't come into this role as a quantitative researcher. I came into this role as a mixed method researcher. I didn't have all the skills for everything. So it's just kind of the ability to learn and pick up stuff. So if it's something that you're more passionate about, then, or you're leaning towards that kind of role, then I'm assuming you would already have that kind of skill set, or some amount of it in terms of interpreting it. But otherwise, it's tough. But I do want to bring in from the futures aspect, like there is an interpretation of data that you have to do, and analyzing of data. And a lot of the times it's a lot of assumptions thrown out there, where you're just doing like simple thing is the number of teenagers getting what is it called? Driver's license right now is really low. Like they don't do it anymore. And the numbers are declining, the number of teenagers getting driver's license as well as jobs right now are really low. So the question was like, why? You kind of like, you have the data in front of you, presented in front of you. You just have to start taking assumptions. And sometimes it's educated assumptions. Sometimes it's just like crap thrown out there. And I literally have thrown stuff like, oh, TikTok, they make money through there. And, you know, just like putting stuff out there. And sometimes it's just interpretive skills, I guess, is something that's necessary when it comes to doing data. But at the same time, when it comes to the field that you're in and just kind of understanding what kind of job you're going for, and those interpretive skills translate no matter what. So just saying it works both ways.
So I'm going to jump in here and ask you another question, Archie. You mentioned going into a room and presenting to a bunch of old men, old white men. And one of the questions we have in the chat is, how are you able to go in and speak the business language to the PMs and the stakeholders? And how can you learn that skill? And how do you make yourself heard and try to push your ideas in a way where you're heard?
I will be honest, I have a specific PM in mind as I'm giving you this answer. It has been a long, troublesome year. It's a matter of proving your worth, which takes time and which takes finesse. And a lot of the times we kind of have formed a group of researchers. We meet constantly and try practice these kind of presenting skills, just like, well, how are you using the words? What is the information you're getting? A lot of the times there are a lot of I take a lot of liberties with redos. So I go back in there and have those conversations. Sometimes I just play the woman card, play dumb. I'm sorry, but that actually helps me. And that's the honest to God truth. I play dumb, play the woman card, and just be like, tell me more. Talk to me about this. And it's just using whatever advantages you have whenever you walk into a room with old white men has been really helpful. And the other thing that I've also done is bring more people along in the room that are on my side. So I will have individual conversations with all the people in the same room and being like, oh, you're on my side, right? You're on my side, right? Bottle of tequila, bottle of champagne. You got it. I got you. And then when we're in the room, we just kind of go, nails to the wall, just railroad the person. And they're just like, yeah, all right, this looks great. This is awesome. This is mind blowing. So make sure you have people who are supporting you in the room with you. Make sure you're practicing a lot of those business speak. And it takes some time, but it's something that's acquired as you start learning and understanding how you have to talk to them. It just can't be the researcher way of talking. It's more like, oh, and this will provide more results. This result will give you this money. This money will give you this. So it's just making sure the impact of any research that you're doing is always prevalent. So every project you do, impact, make sure that is something that you're talking about and is vocally heard. But the other way that I kind of do is I organize a Creative Wednesday within my company, and that I invite tons of other people. The more they start interacting with us, the more they do these kind of smaller mini projects, the more value they start seeing. And also showcasing value has been a simple thing. I put up a bulletin board in the hallway showing what all UX does. I've done, and obviously we're not in the room anymore. So now we're trying to do that in Miro and just being like, oh, these are the articles we're reading. This is what some insights we found from our customers. Just kind of making sure that's constantly shared. And we constantly try and bring more and more people into the room. And the more we do that, the more they're willing to hear us because the space is there for them to talk as well.
Can I back up everything Archie just said? Even earlier when you were like, a key skill of a researcher is to be able to interpret data. That is a critical point. And it's related to having a really solid communication skill set as well. I just think it's so sad that I just wrote dumb equals woman on my notes. It's like, isn't that unfortunate, right? So I take the other side of that card, which is I'm a serious loudmouth, and I just blab. The second I get people in the room, I'm I have a lot of energy for this and I bring that. And one thing I cannot stand is like boring people talking or people who are afraid to be talking. And so I do my best to completely bulldoze a room. And that's actually gone over really well for me, personally, which is why you guys are here, right? Is you want to hear how we personally succeeded. But frankly, like just being super, I remember one time, here's a good example of being female in this industry. Archie works in freight. I work in telematics for vehicles, and I focus on small and medium businesses. So I was on a hiring panel, and this PM, he was like, recently we have redirected all of our product direction, whatever, just like talking about how transformational a recent period of time was. And I was like, that was my work. So moving on, you will be filling my shoes stepping into this role. And then he was like, oh yeah, that was your work. And I was like, bitch, yes, it was. So like you sometimes just, you know, speaking up for yourself, I think is key. Like, I think some of these people can smell blood in the water. And if you're afraid to talk to them, they're going to squish you. So playing dumb is actually a really good research technique, honestly, like pretending you don't know anything about someone's work. I do that a lot in research, but at work, I have a tendency to be like, just like, listen to me, like I have a point to make. I think that was all. I think that was my point to make.
I really appreciate the candor that we're having here. I think that finding an ally is another part of this, right? If you can, because we've all experienced this for sure, right? Like, all right, here's an idea, here's all of the research backing it up. But if it's just your one voice, oftentimes it's overlooked, or it's considered, you know, it's put in the parking lot, it's on the back burner or whatever, all of that kind of speak. But I think if you can find an ally that you know has your back and has influence, then that's an excellent way to really communicate your value. Also, look into, I will find a link for this, but there is a design value index that is a study that is, it's reevaluated, I want to say every year. So yeah, annually, and they evaluate design-led companies against the S&P. And if you can come in and say, companies and products that are based in design research outperform the S&P 500 by 220%. Then people's ears perk up because they're all about saving. I mean, I wish this was different, right? Like, I wish that we lived in a different society in which that wasn't where everyone's core value was. But as it is, I think that that is a place where you can kind of like, oh, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. So the S&P, any type of the, like, any of those industry standard kind of mechanisms, that's a great place to quote when you're trying to advocate for yourself. And I think also, as far as speaking to stakeholders, listen for a long time. Listen to what are those, like, every company has their own kind of like bullshit office speak, right? Where they're like, oh, it's like coming down the pike, or like it's this like really kind of, I don't know, it's not very palatable. But if you can learn to speak their language, that helps as well, because it just is a reinforcement for whoever is on the other side of whatever you're saying. Like, oh, she speaks this language, she's part of my culture, we belong. So there's a sense of belonging, I think, also if you're speaking the same language, which can take time, really, just to establish whatever the vocabulary is, like whatever the specific nomenclature is for that little subculture. So yeah, that's just a recommendation.
Amanda, did you notice anything else in the chat? I saw a couple, but I just didn't know if you saw something.
I guess a question that I feel like will become a follow-up is there like any specific books new UXers can read about the business terms? Like, how do they get business acumen? Do you have any like suggestions or ways that you've learned, or is it kind of like an on the job?
You can tell me that.
I'm gonna go get
learning
some.
on the job. Somebody please give me any insight. I'll take it. I'm taking down notes here, so please.
I guess I would recommend like Harvard Business Review or Forbes, honestly, just like Forbes.com or Harvard Business Review. Any type of, I mean, they have weird ad blockers, but sometimes you can get some great articles for free. And I would say that first before, you know, we give any more money to Jeff Bezos or whatever, but there are some great books out there. I think like Don't Make Me Think is a good one that it kind of like mixes business and UX in a effective way. But really, I think.
Could you repeat the name of the book again? I'm taking notes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, totally. It's called Don't Make Me Think.
Gotcha.
That's a good
Steve Krug, Krug, that one.
Yeah.
I see Haley Womack holding it up for us all. Thank you, Haley. And I also saw Babz walk in with a stack of books.
Yeah, this one is excellent. Jobs to Be Done. This is super businessy, also applicable to everything you ever work on, ever. I have my business owner friends read this too that don't work in UX. This is one that I work literally on the lean product playbook team at my at Verizon. There's only one of our teams, but basically our whole model is based on this. One I'm reading now too, I like this one a lot. It's about how businesses operate in markets and how products, well, anything honestly by Jeff and Josh here is going to be excellent. A lot of really good product books.
I have to add those to my list. There were at least a couple of questions, and it kind of circles back. We talked a little bit about background leading into this career path, and some folks wanted to know, do you recommend a designer with schooling in graphic design go and get their master's in UX design, or is it better to go for a discipline like psychology or sociology?
There's a place for both in the UX research field, to be honest. I did not get a degree in psychology, but I read a lot of books around psychology because that excites me. And a lot of the times that comes into play. And sometimes it's just like self-help books. Sometimes it's just like very trending, start with why, just to make sure I have shit to talk about when people are talking. But I mean, it's just, you start doing that and then you start understanding, and there is an entire field to kind of play around in behavioral UX research, and you can go on along that path. I mean, I can't tell you that if you need to go. I think it's a matter of cultivating those skills. I have done it in terms of practice by doing projects outside of. So I do tons of projects in Europe and I do projects on my own. I have the time, I do it. I think it's important to use those avenues to learn something, explore something, practice something. I practice by doing, I learn by doing. So it's just a matter of me finding something, oh, that's cool, I want to try it now, you know? And that's kind of how I've done it. And the more you have these kind of projects, these are also great projects to show on a portfolio to be like what you're interested in. So I wouldn't say you necessarily have to, but be more open. I mean, now, if you're a very structured person like me, then it's nice to have that, nice to go to school. If you're not, I mean, just, I wouldn't say it's the most important thing. It's like guerrilla way, just learning is free.
Yeah, I think I am a person who always loves school, so I'm excited to be getting a master's, but you don't necessarily need it. Like you're saying, Archie. I mean, I think unfortunately it depends on, I guess it depends on the type of work that you're trying to get and really who's the hiring manager. So there's a lot of variation. But do you think there is still really an unfortunate level of gatekeeping around higher education? So it does, I don't think it's going to do anyone any harm to further their education. I'll say that, although like as a person who's still paying off their student loans, like I totally hear that argument. But I think that you can really self-educate at a level of depth in UX that isn't really available, say, in, I don't know, some other fields. Maybe they're in like software or other technical fields like that are specific to digital. You can probably self-educate, but I think there is still value if it's completely new. You know, like if you didn't come by this field organically and from your other professional pursuits, and you just are like, I want to make a complete career shift, or I'm brand new to all of this, then I think there's still a ton of value in pursuing education from an experienced practitioner. But if you end up in a culture, like a work culture where UX is happening around you and you can learn from those people, I would also put a lot of high value on that as well. And really just like your grit and your own personal dedication to trying. Also, Archie, what you're saying, like an openness to working, like moonlighting, really, I think, and like working on your own personal pursuits is really valuable. It does take a lot of time, right? And like a lot of times, especially for passion projects, people don't have a budget to help you, but exposure can be valuable. But don't work too much for free.
Good to know. I mean, I don't. Like a lot of these projects are just like fun so I can play around. They're just they're nothings. So
You know what I mean? Because some people will be like, no, it's exposure.
No, I'm over that culture as well. I actually had someone try to shame me for like offering up a pricing model for my services. I'm like, what about the good of the community? I was like, I need to eat. What are you talking about? What? Like,
Yeah.
fuck off, man.
Yeah, I think there's a certain level where it's like, this is great. And then if you go too far, then.
No, it also, I think all three of us are from the arts where like internships were never paid ever. Whereas I looked at all my friends in like biology degree programs that like had these paid internships, and it's like I'm used to the culture of not getting paid for my work, and I think there is a time and place for that, and it is never again for me personally. Like you can make that choice, right? So
I also think like if you're, just to add to you, it can y'all hear me? No, you got me.
Now
you froze, but you're back.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just saying that y'all have a couple more years on me. So it's great that you guys have already built up that experience and have an understanding. For someone who's just starting, it helps to do like these kind of unpaid work. But yes, I get to what you're saying. When I come to a point where I'm master, I don't care. I'll learn it, but I'll still get paid for it. But then I totally see that as working.
It's making the choice, right? It's having the autonomy over that choice. And like for me, I just got my first full-time job like 2 years ago, which was very late for some of my peers, right? And I've just decided never again. I'm not going back. Like I've worked, anyways, that's another story. I think the question was advanced degree or not. And I think again, my answer would be like, depends on what kind of skill set you want. Like if you're really confident and really excellent and you're excelling at what you're doing now, no need to go to grad school, frankly, unless you want to get paid more. Like there's also the balance between like debt of like PhD or master's versus your salary, right? So like think about the numbers, also think about the experience, right? It's like I think for me, going to grad school was actually crucial because it skilled me in a way that I was not skilled. I was becoming a teacher. I was going to become a teacher. And whereas that is a definite skill set, I did not have the all the skills that I use on a daily basis. Basically, my interviewing, coding, analytical skills, that stuff, thematic analytics of a transcript. I had no idea how to do that. So I'm glad I went to school for it. So I picked sociology because that is what interests me the most. And then I'm sure it's the same for Meg, like picking psych, like over something like, you know, a degree. In sociology, my boss has a degree in cognitive neuroscience and like clinical counseling. So, you know, runs the gamut.
Yeah, I would say, just to the original question, and this is quick, but I think the original question was like, would it be best for graphic design, like someone with the graphic design expertise to pursue a graduate degree in psych versus UX specifically? I think that depends on your personal, I guess, confidence in, do you only ever want to do UX, right? Because I think if you pursue a degree in UX, that's highly specific, and probably eventually there will be an ease of transition from a UX degree to some of these other professions. But I think if you were to pursue a master's in something like soc or psych, then I guess it just depends on how open your options you're looking for.
That's really good advice. Gosh, there's so many questions. I hope we get to some of them. I'm going to ask this one though, because somebody brought up cognitive science, and this person mentioned it and said, my question is, in your experience, how does UX research interface with accessibility and inclusivity?
Can you repeat that question again?
How does UX research interface with accessibility and inclusivity?
Can I offer an example, actually? So I have a friend who works at Mozilla in Portland, and he and I were having a chat the other night, and we were talking about age as a disability and using a browser, right? And so what we were talking about is like the creation of age as a disability to design a design that has been put in place by somebody who wasn't thinking about people, who then made them disabled, right? So it's like anything that somebody who is older cannot access is likely harder to access than something that they can, right? So it's like a system, it is, you know, maybe early systems were designed by people who were not thinking of accessibility, right? But now we have this wonderful thing, accessibility studies. We also have user experience, and it's like somebody with or without a disability. And in this particular example, we're talking about age as a disability, you know, like the classic, like, I can't use a computer kind of stereotype thing. It's like, maybe you can't use a computer because it was designed to be unusable. Yeah. So it is something that at least we talk a lot about at work. My peers talk a lot about. I'm somebody who has multiple disabilities. Mine are invisible. And it's not, I mean, it's just something that you have to like assume that everyone is dealing with. Like, I think what's cool about UX is that we, you know, as a researcher, I'm not going to advocate for a really complicated design because it looks cool, because I'm more interested in accessibility than like anything else, frankly. I don't really know how to answer that question other than that, just stating that it's definitely a conversation that we have a lot at my company. We hired an accessibility expert a year ago to work in one department, and it's something that like my friends across the planet are always thinking about too. It's like, how do we construct barriers to access for people, right? How has our product done that, and how can we undo them as UX researchers? It's just part of the ongoing conversation.
Anything you guys want to add to that?
I would add just when designing research studies, being certain that, I touched on this in the beginning, but just being certain that you aren't just reaching out to people that look and think like you, because I think that that is also a human nature, and even for UX folks, that can be a limitation. So we, time and time again, find that being inclusive and having a diverse set of voices always ends up with a stronger product, but we often don't have the patience to source everyone that needs to be asked before we make decisions around a product. So I think really just having the dedication to that inclusivity is going to go a long way, and like advocating for it in your just in your departments or in your groups, or if you're a consultant, advocating that this is important even if it takes a little bit longer, is something that I think about.
So we're actually currently designing our design system. Not me particular, we have a design team. And this is a conversation that I think is great to have at the foundational level in one area, where before you start any such projects, it's just like outlining some of the biases, some of the assumptions that you have. I've done that for projects where we kind of throw it on a board to see what comes up. And a lot of the times diversity or inclusion, accessibility don't really come up. Like, it's not been a thing of conversation, and it is a matter of putting those stickies down, or just being like, these are conversations to have. Where does this take place? And we've seen tons of people already getting sued for not being accessible. So making sure like that is predominantly known to people, like, this is happening, you should be aware. And just as a researcher, you have to be an advocate for it. I do want to say that having people from different backgrounds and diversities, and even if they pick people that look like them, you'll still end up getting a diverse background because there are people on your team that have that. So that is something it is like an unsaid bias. It does happen, but you can mitigate those by making sure your teammates are also as diverse as you are thinking about it, because that helps a lot when it comes to research. Like, I was designing a project for Uber a while back, and they weren't even thinking of pregnant women, and my sister was pregnant at the time, and I just brought it up. I'm like, what about that? And they go like, oh shit. So like making sure that your backgrounds also come into the play, because that brings that kind of diversity and inclusion necessary. Like I said, I'm in a group of I'm talking to a group of white men, old white men, hiring me. I'm going to say, thank heavens they did, because now they have someone diverse enough to claim, like, it might be a token thing, but it's not. I mean, at least to say, yes, we're considering that, even within the company, and it shows outside of as well. I see that. I see it that way, at least.
That's a great point. One thing that I know my class is talking a lot about, and that designers are always asking me about, is how to portfolios and case studies. And in regards to UX research, for the aspiring UX researcher, what do you advise that they include in their portfolio?
It's an ongoing struggle for me, because I keep going back and being like, I don't like this, I don't like that. Anyways, but I've started to look at it very linearly. I don't have the time to look at tons of portfolios, I'll be honest. So I'll just be like skimming through them. So you basically have to have information enough to skim through them. And what you have to show is your thinking process, your thought process. So sometimes I just like draw a diagram of how I conducted research, and that would be that. And I will have answers as why I chose some of those tools, because that helped me achieve the end goal. So it just, sometimes it's as simple as that. I will just draw that out and be like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm going to show as a portfolio piece. And sometimes it's a little more effort. But a lot of times the thing that I make a mistake and I keep telling people to do otherwise is talk about all the things that you did. How were you beneficial? And make sure those things are called upon in your portfolio. So if you have done something, this is what you have done, say that. Make sure that is extremely prevalent. Show personality, show your diversity, show where you're coming from. All of that matters, because in the end of the day, it's a whole rounded candidate. It's not just like this is the research I do. So when I'm looking at that, that's what I look for. Apart from that, I also, like, in terms of case studies, I take a very linear route. So starting with define, design, the whole 6 steps. I keep forgetting 5 or 6 steps that are there. Just make sure you call upon those. I mean, everyone uses it, or 4 steps. Everyone uses it. It's just, it's normal way of doing things. It's okay if it's the same thing. Make sure you answer the questions of why. Those are the key things, like why you chose what you chose. And if it's a short sentence, that's okay. But long essays don't really do anyone any favors, and it really just is too much to read. So skim notes, like jot down notes.
I don't want to like tank us off the portfolio question, but you also have to get in the room for a portfolio review. You know what I mean? So like, make sure your resume is good. See if you know anybody at the company that you're hiring. See if your friends are hiring. See if your dog walker's neighbor's sister's mother's uncle is hiring. Like, figure out how you're connected to people, because you're not going to get a portfolio review if someone's not going to look at your resume. Someone's not going to schedule an interview with you. It's like, you have to be impressive from the jump, and you have to be what they're looking for, right? So, I mean, gosh, I don't know how many resumes I sent out that went completely unanswered, probably hundreds across different geographies, countries, states, like an unbelievable variety. But the only person, I only had 2 portfolio reviews out of like probably 200 applications. So portfolio review is important, but also getting into the room is very important. So focus on all steps of it. Like, don't be super hung up on something that is like the most difficult thing for you if it's portfolio. Like, if you're a really good interviewer, focus on that as well, and like make sure you're prepared for that. Focus on a very strong resume that, as our panelists have said, like, speak to your strengths, your methodologies, you know, why you're pulling something out on your resume or your CV. Because, you know, if you're a bit older, like I was when I entered UX, like I've done a lot of different things. Make sure you can speak to all the things that you have on your resume or that are in your portfolio. Be very choosy. If you're looking for a job as a researcher, I always recommend this. Market yourself as a researcher. Don't be like, oh, I'm also a designer and a tap dancer. It's like, if you want a research job, target that. Pull out a bunch of examples that speak to, like, unequivocally why you're a good researcher, not while you're good at other things too. It's just like, speak to being a researcher from like the moment 0 in your application process.
This is great advice to just focus really on exactly the type of position that you're looking for. And I think also, once you do have an interview, like, prepare for hours, like not just for a few minutes before the interview, or don't just like wing it because you feel confident. Prepare endlessly for that interview, because that's really, I mean, that's your opportunity, right? And the portfolio piece, I mean, I think that, Archie, what you mentioned, just keeping it as simple as possible. As somebody who sits on hiring teams, I don't say often, but every once in a while, everyone's busy. So like, keeping it as scannable as possible. What was the goal of your project? What was the scope of the project? What does it look like before? What does it look like afterwards? What are the planned activities? What did you do? Here are some screenshots, you know, keeping it visual. Who did you interview? How did you interview them? What was their methodology? And then any outcomes. So yeah, a linear process, but just think about it as like bullet points almost, because that's really probably as much time as folks are going to spend, which I know is like, can be heartbreaking because we work really hard on these portfolios, but just keeping them as scannable as possible really, I think, is helpful.
Great advice. I think we have time for, oh no, go ahead, Archie. I'll let you finish up.
Something.
Yeah, yeah.
This was actually a conversation among the researchers on our team, is what are the metrics that can make you marketable as a researcher? And it was, we were talking about this and we were like, workshop hours, client hours, you know, like we're starting to see what those are. And there were like a couple of things that I was thinking about, and I wanted to pose this question out to maybe the rest of the team. Like, what are some metrics? Because these are some things that can be shown on a resume, because you don't really see that fully in just like a portfolio or in conversation, but having these kind of metrics would be, I think it's kind of cool. So I started taking them down. I don't know what's going to come of it, but like, you never know. Like, if it's going to help, it's going to help.
Great. So we're coming up on almost 8. I think we have time for like a quick wrap up. And there's so many questions. If you guys had a question that didn't get answered tonight, feel free to go onto Slack. I'll figure out a way to get your question answered. Okay, so go into Slack and ask your question there, and I'll also have the chat transcript. But one final thing to wrap us up is, what is the one piece of advice that you would give either aspiring UX researchers or people who are ready to move to the next level in their career as a UX researcher? I made them think.
This is, I mean, this is what I do, and like, if any, this is what I tell to all my advisees and my mentees and stuff. It's just like, be confident in yourself. It's so crucial. It's so just one example. It's like when you're learning a foreign language, perhaps, and someone asks you to repeat something, and they don't ask you to repeat something because you said it wrong. They asked you to repeat it because they didn't hear you. So just assume that people didn't hear you, not that you did it wrong. It's my best advice.
That is awesome advice. Do you have, Meg or Archie, do you have anything to add?
Go ahead, Archie.
Meg. No, go for it.
What I was going to say is, I think just staying open, because I think that UX opportunities present themselves in various ways. So I think just staying open and staying, I guess, just dedicated to like what you are actually excited about. You know, I would discourage folks from really taking something just because it was going to be great on their resume. Really spend the time on what are going to be the things that really turn you on, because that's going to be palpable and it's going to be noticeable in your interview and in your work. So just really just like staying true. It's very aligned with staying confident.
I do want to say that as you're trying to shift in or make a change, constantly be open to learning. I mean, yes, open is one thing as well, but constantly learning. I randomly reach out to people just being like, hey, what do you do? Tell me. Like, I don't know, just talk to me and have conversations. I don't know where it'll get me, but I just want to learn. So sometimes it's learning from their experience. Sometimes it's learning from what people have written. It's just being open to that, constantly looking for that. And opportunities don't exactly come on LinkedIn in the job section. I will say that. I actually I was studying with my bosses in a class, and I literally, my last post was like, hey, here's my project. I spent 1.5 years on this project. I love it dearly. I also want a job. Help me out. And I got a job. And so I don't necessarily rely on traditional methods, because they invariably fail me and I have the worst luck in the world. Just like, I feel like I look terrible on paper. I can't help it. I have better conversations than I do in like on a piece of paper. So it's just know your strengths and use that and market that. And so nowadays I just start reaching out to people. That's kind of how like me and Babz met. We were like, oh, this looks interesting. I want to know more. Babz, come have coffee with me. That's it. That was it. Then it was like we worked together. Then it was like friendship for the ages. Now you're stuck with me, Babz. I'm so sorry. It's one of those things. So I just like look out for people, look out for more than yourself. I mean, you are not the end of it. So everyone, we're in this together. So just help each other out, learn from each other, and keep talking, keep, learning, I guess. And something will come. I just believe in the universe.
I love that so much. You guys are amazing. Can we get a big virtual applause for Meg, Archie, and Babz? Thank you guys all for joining us tonight. Really, really appreciate your time. And can people try to connect with you on LinkedIn? Is that okay to connect with you?
I just looked at my phone. It's blowing up. So yeah.
I know. Same. It's all good. I would say, for everybody, if you're connecting with us, like there was like 130 people at one time on this call. So give us some time to respond to you as well. And like, don't think that we're ignoring you, but it like, work hours, we got to work in a few hours. Like when we get, we'll give us a few days, but we're happy to hear from you probably. Yeah. Speaking for myself, I don't know about Archie really.
Probably. Keyword probably.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your time, and
we will say goodbye too.
Yeah. Bye. All right, I'm gonna end the call, and I don't mean to be abrupt, but my students are like, when is she gonna leave? So I better go. Y'all have a wonderful evening, and I will touch base with you soon. Bye.
Thank you.